You are standing on the African savanna. The sun is directly overhead. There is no shade within walking distance. The temperature is well above body heat. Your skin is completely exposed. And you have been out here for hours, hunting, tracking, moving across open grassland with no protection from the sky. Your ancestors lost their thick fur coat a long time ago, and your bare skin is absorbing ultraviolet radiation like a solar panel. You are not wearing anything. Modern humans tend to think of clothing as a given. It is the first thing you reach for when you get out of bed. It is the second layer of your identity. It is protection, fashion, status, warmth, modesty, all rolled into one package that you put on without thinking twice. But if you go back far enough in human history, there was a long stretch of time when nobody wore clothes. Not because they were poor, not because they had not invented fashion yet, but because clothing simply did not exist as a concept. So, what happened? What made that first person pick up an animal skin and wrap it around their body? And was the real reason what you think it was? The answer, as it turns out, is hidden in the DNA of a creature you probably want to scratch off your head right now. Lice. The story of human clothing starts with lice, and it is one of the most elegant detective stories in evolutionary biology. Let me walk you through it. You may not know this, but there are actually 3 distinct types of lice that infest human bodies. Head lice live in your hair and feed on your scalp. Pubic lice live in coarse body hair, and body lice are the ones that matter for our story. Body lice do not live on your skin directly. They live in your clothing. They lay their eggs in the seams of your shirt. They feed on your skin when you wear something, but they retreat into the fabric when you take it off. They are completely dependent on fabric for their survival. If you remove clothing from the equation, body lice cannot exist. Here is the stroke of genius from Dr. Mark Stoneking at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. In 2003, Stoneking realized that body lice and head lice were once the same species. They split apart when humans started wearing clothes permanently, because the lice that ended up living in fabric evolved differently from the lice that stayed in hair. If you could measure the genetic distance between the 2 types of lice, you could calculate when the split occurred, and that would tell you when clothing became a permanent feature of human life. Stoneking sequenced the mitochondrial DNA of both types of lice. He compared the genetic differences. He applied a molecular clock, which uses the known rate of genetic mutations, to estimate how long ago 2 species diverged. The date he got was approximately 170,000 years ago. That is the moment body lice became a separate species from head lice. That is the moment clothing became a permanent, everyday part of human existence. 170,000 years ago, that is nearly twice as old as the earliest Homo sapiens fossils we have found. Humans were wearing clothes before we were fully anatomically modern in the skull and skeleton. Dr. Melissa Toups at Florida State University refined this estimate in a 2010 study published in Molecular Biology and Evolution. She used a larger sample of lice from different populations around the world and applied more sophisticated genetic analysis. Her refined estimate came back at 170,000 years, plus or minus 40,000 years. The numbers held up across different methods and different populations. The lice were telling a consistent story, but the lice only tell you when, they do not tell you why. And that is where the story becomes more complicated and a lot more interesting. To understand why humans started wearing clothes, you have to first understand why we lost our fur, because that loss created the problem that clothing had to solve. At some point in our evolutionary past, humans became the only primate without a thick coat of body hair. We became the naked ape, and this is one of the strangest things about our species. There are over 5,000 species of mammals on this planet. Almost all of them are covered in fur. Seals have fur. Bears have fur. Even elephants, which look mostly bald, have a visible layer of hair across their bodies. Humans are one of the very few mammals that are almost completely hairless, with only our scalp, armpits, and groin retaining any significant hair coverage. Dr. Nina Jablonski at Penn State University has spent decades unraveling the mystery of human skin evolution. Her work suggests that the loss of body hair was driven by one major factor: the need to stay cool. Around 2 million years ago, our ancestors started moving from shaded forests onto open savannas. They began walking upright and covering long distances to hunt and gather. Walking upright exposes more of your body to direct sunlight. A thick fur coat traps body heat and prevents sweat from evaporating efficiently. That combination made overheating a real and potentially deadly risk. Natural selection favored individuals with less body hair because they could cool down faster in the heat. They could stay active during the hottest part of the day when predators were resting in the shade. They could chase prey to exhaustion, a hunting strategy called persistence, hunting that requires hours of steady running under direct sunlight. The naked ones survived, the hairy ones overheated and died. But losing your fur created a new set of problems. Your skin was now exposed to the elements in a way it had never been before. The ultraviolet radiation in equatorial Africa is intense enough to cause sunburn, DNA damage, and skin cancer within hours of exposure. The human body responded by evolving dark skin rich in melanin, a natural pigment that absorbs and scatters UV radiation. That is why indigenous populations in equatorial regions have the darkest skin. It is biological sun protection. Melanin helps with UV radiation, but it does not help with everything. It does not protect your skin from insect bites. It does not protect you from scratches when you push through thorny bushes. It does not protect you from cold nights when the temperature drops. And if you are moving through dense vegetation every single day, your bare skin is constantly being cut, scraped, bitten, and irritated. Clothing solved all of those problems at once. It was a second skin that you could take off, clean, repair, and replace. The earliest clothing was almost certainly animal hides. The direct evidence for this is frustratingly scarce because organic materials rot. Skin, fur, plant fibers, all of these things decompose within decades in most environments. 170,000 years later, there is almost nothing left to find in the dirt. But there is indirect evidence, and it comes in the form of stone tools. Stone scrapers, for example. You can recognize a hide scraping tool by the distinctive pattern of wear on its edge. Scraping a fresh animal hide to remove flesh and fat creates a specific kind of polish that does not look like the wear from cutting wood or butchering meat. Archaeologists have found stone scrapers with this exact hide processing wear pattern at sites dating back 200,000 years or more. Dr. Paula Villa at the University of Colorado has studied these hide-working tools across multiple sites in Europe and Africa. She found that by 200,000 years ago, early humans had developed a dedicated toolkit for processing animal skins. They had scrapers for cleaning hides. They had awls for punching holes. They had stone knives for cutting shapes. That is not simple behavior. That is a multi-step manufacturing process that required planning, skill, and knowledge passed down through many generations. But there is a gap in the archaeological story. Scrapers and awls tell you that people were processing hides. They do not tell you what they were actually doing with those hides after processing. Were they draping them over their shoulders like a cape? Were they tying them around their waist like a skirt? Or were they actually sewing them into fitted garments that covered the arms and legs? The answer came from a cave in South Africa called Sibudu. In 2008, Dr. Lucinda Backwell at the University of the Witwatersrand was examining a collection of bone tools from Sibudu Cave when she found something extraordinary: a bone needle with a carefully carved eye at one end. A needle designed specifically for sewing, and it was 61,000 years old. An eyed needle is not a trivial piece of technology. To make one, you have to take a piece of animal bone, carve it into a thin, pointed shaft, and then cut a hole through the blunt end. The hole has to be small enough to thread sinew or plant fiber through, but large enough to be functional. Bone is hard and brittle. One wrong move with your stone tool and the needle snaps. You have to start over from the beginning. The Sibidu needle shows that humans 61,000 years ago had the precision tool-making skills and the patience to create sewing equipment. And they were not the only ones. Eyed needles have been found at archaeological sites across Europe and Asia, dating to between 40,000 and 20,000 years ago. They appear in the record at roughly the same time as the first evidence of fitted clothing. The correlation is not an accident. You cannot make a fitted garment without a needle. You can drape a hide over your shoulder. You can tie a plant fiber around your waist. You can punch holes in leather and lace it together with strips of sinew. But to make something that actually fits the contours of the human body, something with sleeves that do not restrict arm movement and legs that allow you to run and squat, you need to sew. The needle made fitted clothing possible, and fitted clothing enabled human migration into cold climates. There is a site in France called Abri du Marais, where archaeologists found something even older and more fragile than a needle. A piece of twisted plant fiber, string, dating to roughly 52,000 years ago, and it was made by Neanderthals. Dr. Marie-Hélène Monsal and her team published this discovery in Scientific Reports in 2020. They found a fragment of cordage made from twisted plant fibers, preserved in the sediment of the cave. It was not a thick rope, just a thin strand of twisted fibers, but the twist was intentional. The fibers had been rolled together under tension to create a stronger, longer material. That is the oldest direct evidence of fiber technology ever discovered, and it was made by a species that was not Homo sapiens. This matters because fiber technology is the foundation of textiles. Before you can weave fabric, you need to know how to twist plant fibers into consistent, strong threads. The Neanderthals at Abri du Marais had that knowledge 52,000 years ago. They knew how to make string, and once you can make string, you can make nets, bags, baskets, and eventually woven cloth. Another site tells us even more about the evolution of clothing technology. Holy Fels Cave in Germany, where a team led by Dr. Nicholas Conard from the University of Tübingen found a 35,000-year-old tool carved from mammoth ivory. It was not a weapon. It was a tool specifically designed for twisting plant fibers into rope. A dedicated rope-making machine from the Ice Age. The tool had 4 carefully carved holes, each one shaped to guide plant fibers as they were twisted together. Conard published the finding in Science Advances in 2020. So Neanderthals had rope. They had string. They had hide-scraping tools optimized for leather working. What kind of clothing were they actually wearing? Dr. Mark Collard at Simon Fraser University published a study in 2015 that tried to answer this question by comparing the stone toolkits of Neanderthals and early modern humans. He found that Neanderthals had specialized scrapers that were shaped differently from general-purpose cutting tools. They were designed specifically for removing flesh from animal skins without cutting through the hide underneath. That level of specialization tells us that hide processing was not an occasional activity for Neanderthals. It was a regular, practiced craft that they invested in seriously. Collard's analysis suggested that Neanderthals were making fitted clothing, not just draped hides. The evidence is indirect, but the logic is strong. Ice Age winters in Europe were brutal. Temperatures could drop to -20 degrees Celsius in the coldest months. You cannot survive that with a loose animal skin thrown over your shoulder. Cold air rushes in through every gap. Body heat leaks out faster than your metabolism can generate it. You need something sealed, layered, and tight against the body. Neanderthals lived through Ice Age winters in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They must have had effective clothing. But there is one hypothesis that adds a darker twist to the Neanderthal clothing story. Some researchers argue that Neanderthals actually had less sophisticated clothing than modern humans, and that this difference contributed to their extinction. The idea is that Neanderthals relied more on their stockier, more heat-retaining body shapes and their thicker body hair to survive the cold, while modern humans relied on better clothing technology. When the climate became extremely volatile around 40,000 years ago, with rapid swings between cold and warm periods, the Neanderthals could not adapt their clothing fast enough. The modern humans, with their needles, fitted garments, and woven fabrics, pulled through. It is a stark picture, if it is true. Two human species, both descended from the same African ancestors, facing the same Ice Age winter. One species had better sewing technology. The other species went extinct. Your sweater might be a survival advantage that shaped the entire course of human history. Now let us go back to Africa, because there is one more piece of the puzzle that pushes the clothing story in a surprising direction. Around 100,000 years ago, at a site called Blombo's Cave on the southern coast of South Africa, Dr. Christopher Henshelwood at the University of Bergen discovered an ochre processing workshop. Ochre is a natural iron oxide pigment that produces red, yellow, and brown colors. The people at Blombo's were collecting pieces of ochre, grinding them into a fine powder, mixing the powder with bone marrow and crushed charcoal, and storing the resulting paint in abalone shells. They were making paint deliberately, systematically, with a multi-step process that required gathering materials from different locations. Henshelwood published the discovery in Science in 2011. The date was 100,000 years ago, that is 70,000 years before the lice-based clothing date. The most obvious use of ochre paint is body decoration, painting designs on your skin, drawing patterns on your face, coloring your hair, signaling identity, status, and group membership through visual markers on your body. If you are already decorating your skin with ochre, the step to covering your body with decorated materials is a short one. This suggests something that flips the conventional story of clothing on its head. We usually think of clothing as a practical invention that people later started decorating. The sequence feels natural. First, you need to stay warm, so you invent clothes. Then, once you have clothes, you start decorating them. But the Blombo's evidence turns that sequence around. Humans were decorating their bodies with ochre at least 70,000 years before body lice tell us they were wearing clothes permanently. Self-decoration came first. Practical covering came second. It makes sense when you think about it. Before you could process an animal hide into a wearable garment, you had to understand that your body was something that could be deliberately modified, that the way you appeared to others was not fixed, that you could change your appearance to communicate something. Body painting was the first exploration of that idea. Clothing was the permanent, all-day version. The social implications of this are enormous. Clothing did not just protect your skin from the sun and the cold. It told other humans who you were, which group you belonged to, what status you held, what role you played in your community. Clothing was the first form of social signaling that extended beyond your face and your voice. The Grecian culture in Europe, around 30,000 years ago, took this to an entirely new level. The famous Venus figurines, small carved statues of female figures, wear what look like woven hats, belts, and string skirts. These are not just decorative details added by the artist. They are specific clothing items that must have existed in real life. String skirts, in particular, are fascinating because they are not practical for warmth or protection. They are purely symbolic. They are signaling fertility, status, or group identity. 30,000 years ago, humans were already using clothing as a language. Think about what happens when you walk into a room full of strangers. The very first thing you notice is what people are wearing. You process their clothes unconsciously. In milliseconds, you make split-second judgments about their profession, their wealth, their personality, their social circle. That instinct is not a modern invention. It reaches back 100,000 years to the first time a human picked up a piece of ochre and decided that the way they looked on the outside mattered to how others perceived them. The needle, the hide, the ochre. the genetic clock of the louse, the Venus figurines with their woven hats and string skirts. Each piece of evidence tells the same story from a different angle. Humans started wearing clothes not for one simple reason, but for many reasons that reinforced each other over long stretches of time. For warmth, when the temperature dropped. For UV protection under the African sun. For decoration and identity. For social signaling. For comfort and utility. All of these pressures pushed our ancestors in the same direction toward covering their bodies, until clothing became as fundamental to human existence as food and shelter and language. And the lice were watching the entire time. The next time you pull a shirt over your head in the morning, pause for a second and think about what you are really doing. You are not just getting dressed for the day. You are continuing a tradition that is 170,000 years old. You are wrapping yourself in the technology that allowed your ancestors to leave Africa and colonize every continent on Earth. You are participating in the longest-running fashion show in the history of life. Your shirt is older than your species, and it all started with a louse.